The photograph in his trembling hand showed a woman who had supposedly died 23 years ago. A woman Sarah had never met, a woman who looked exactly like her. Sarah had walked past these 12-foot iron gates every single day for almost 4 years, selling roses just to survive. The man who lived inside had bought flowers from her exactly 3 times, never looked at her face, never asked her name. But today, when she pressed that intercom button one last time, everything changed. Because when he opened the door and saw the birthmark on her wrist, all the color drained from his face. He whispered 4 words that made no sense. "That can't be real." Before I tell you what happened inside that mansion, you need to understand something. Sarah Mitchell had spent her entire childhood in the foster care system, 11 different homes before she turned 16, no parents, no family history, just a name the social workers gave her and a crescent-shaped birthmark on her left wrist that no doctor could explain. It wasn't a burn scar. It wasn't something she was born with in the typical sense. Medical records called it an anomaly. Sarah called it the only thing that made her unique. For years she had dreamed of saving enough money to hire someone who could tell her where she came from, who her real parents were, why she was abandoned at a hospital in Nevada with no identification, no note, nothing but a blanket and that strange mark on her skin. Now the man standing in front of her, this wealthy stranger named Michael Sterling, was staring at that same mark like he had seen a ghost. His hands were shaking, his breathing had become shallow, and when Sarah looked down at the photograph he had dropped on the marble floor, her heart stopped. The woman in that picture had the same dark hair, the same green eyes,
Why is my mom's
the same
photo
facial
here?
structure. It was like looking into a mirror that showed her 25 years older. Michael picked up the photo with unsteady hands and said something that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. "Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we dive deeper, please like this video and subscribe. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredibly special knowing our stories are resonating with people across the globe." This was my wife. Her name was Catherine. She died in a house fire 2 decades ago while she was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. How do you process information like that? How do you stand there, soaking wet from the rain, holding a basket of unsold roses, and hear a stranger tell you that you might be his dead wife's child? Sarah wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to pretend this conversation never happened, to protect herself from the hope that was already rising in her chest like a dangerous tide. But she couldn't move, because Michael was now staring at her birthmark again, and tears were forming in his eyes. He said, "Catherine had that exact same mark. She told me it was hereditary, that if we had a daughter, she would have it too." Think about this for a moment. What would you do if a stranger showed you a photograph and claimed you might be someone you never knew existed? Would you believe them? Would you walk away? Would you demand proof? Sarah stood frozen in that doorway, her mind racing through every possibility, every foster home, every night she spent wondering why no one wanted her. And now this man was saying that maybe, just maybe, someone had wanted her all along, that maybe her mother hadn't abandoned her, that maybe something terrible had happened, something that tore a family apart before Sarah even had a chance to know they existed. Michael's voice cracked when he asked her one simple question. "How old are you?" Sarah whispered, 23. "I'll be 24 in 2 months." And that's when Michael's legs nearly gave out beneath him, because the timeline matched perfectly. The fire happened 23 years ago. Catherine was 8 months pregnant, and Sarah was found abandoned at a hospital just 2 days after that fire, with no explanation, no identity, and a birthmark that shouldn't exist. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Michael had given her his phone number, told her to think about everything, to take her time. But how do you take your time with information like that? She sat in her tiny apartment, the one she shared with 2 other girls, staring at the business card he'd pressed into her hand. Michael Sterling, architect. There was an address, a phone number, and beneath it all, a weight she couldn't shake. What if he was telling the truth? What if she really was his daughter? But more importantly, what if she wasn't? What if this was just a coincidence, a cruel twist of fate that would give her hope only to rip it away again? Three things kept running through her mind. First, she had been found at a hospital in Nevada with no identification. The nurses said someone had left her in the emergency room lobby, wrapped in a blanket, with a note that simply read, "Please take care of her." No name, no explanation. Just those 5 words. Second, Michael's wife, Catherine, had allegedly died in a fire exactly 23 years ago. The news report said the house burned to the ground in the middle of the night. They never found a body. Investigators assumed she had been consumed by the flames, that nothing remained to recover. But what if that wasn't true? What if Catherine had survived? What if she had given birth and then disappeared? And third, this birthmark. Sarah touched it now, tracing the crescent shape with her finger. It was the only constant in her life, the only thing that had been with her since the beginning. And now Michael was telling her it meant something, that it connected her to a woman she'd never met. Sarah picked up her phone. Her hands were trembling as she typed Michael's number. The call rang twice before he answered. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept either. "Sarah?" She took a breath. "I need to know the truth. I need to know if I'm really your daughter." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Michael said something that changed everything. "I've already scheduled a DNA test. Tomorrow morning, if you're willing." Sarah closed her eyes. This was it. The moment that would either give her a family or confirm that she was still alone in the world. "I'll be there," she whispered. The next morning, Sarah stood outside a private medical clinic. Michael was already waiting, looking like he hadn't slept in days. A nurse led them into a sterile room and took samples from both of them, cheek swabs, blood tests. The doctor said results would take 3 to 5 days. As they walked out together, Michael turned to her. "Whatever the results say, I want you to know something. I've been looking for answers for 23 years. Whether you're my daughter or not, you've given me hope." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but one question burned in her mind. If she really was his daughter, if Catherine had survived that fire, then where was she now? Why had Sarah been abandoned? Michael must have seen the question in her eyes, because he said quietly, "If the test comes back positive, we're going to find out what really happened that night, I promise." Michael Sterling hadn't always been the quiet, isolated man who lived alone in that massive house. 23 years ago, he was different, full of life, full of dreams. He was a young architect building his first major project, and he was deeply in love with a woman named Catherine Hayes. They met at a charity event. She was a teacher at an elementary school, spending her evenings volunteering at shelters. He was drawn to her kindness, the way she saw good in everyone. 6 months later, they were married. A year after that, Catherine told him she was pregnant. Michael remembered that day perfectly, the way her eyes lit up, the way she placed his hand on her stomach and said, "We're going to be parents." He had never felt joy like that before. He designed their dream home himself. Every detail was personal. A nursery with windows facing east so their daughter would wake up to sunlight. A garden where Catherine could grow vegetables. It was supposed to be there forever. But 2 weeks before Catherine's due date, everything ended. Michael had been working late at his office finalizing blueprints for another project. He got the call at 2:30 in the morning. Fire department. His home was burning. By the time he arrived, flames had swallowed everything. Firefighters told him no one could have survived. They searched for days but never found remains. The official report said the fire started in the electrical system. An accident. A tragedy. Michael was left with nothing but photos and memories of a life that vanished in smoke. For years he searched for answers. He hired investigators, tracked down every lead, but everyone told him the same thing. Catherine was gone. The baby was gone. Let it go. Move on. But Michael couldn't. How do you move on when you never got to say goodbye? When there was no body to bury, no closure? He stopped designing buildings, stopped seeing friends. He bought that mansion and filled it with pictures of Catherine, trying to keep her memory alive. People said he was stuck in the past. Maybe he was. But that past was all he had left. Then Sarah walked into his life. When he saw that birthmark, something inside him broke open. 23 years of grief, of questions, of wondering what if. And now there was a chance. A real, tangible chance that his daughter had survived. That Catherine had somehow gotten out. That everything he believed about that night was wrong. But if Sarah was his daughter, that meant someone had lied. Someone had hidden the truth. Someone had taken his child and made sure he'd never find her. And Michael needed to know who. He needed to know why. Because if there were answers out there, answers that could explain 23 years of pain, he was going to find them. No matter what it took. 3 days felt like 3 years. Sarah went to work at the flower shop, came home, stared at her phone, and waited. Michael called her once each day, not to pressure her, just to check in, to make sure she was okay. On the third night, Sarah's roommate asked her what was going on. Sarah told her everything. About the mansion, the photograph, the birthmark, the DNA test. Her roommate sat there in stunned silence and then said, "What if he's telling the truth? What if you actually have a father?" Sarah hadn't let herself think about it that way. A father, someone who wanted her, someone who had been looking for her without even knowing she existed. On the morning of the 5th day, Michael called. His voice was shaking. "The results are in. Can you meet me at the clinic?" Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She took the bus across town, her hands gripping the seat in front of her. When she arrived, Michael was standing outside, holding a manila envelope. He looked terrified. They walked inside together without saying a word. The doctor led them into a private office and sat down across from them. She opened the file, looked at both of them and said, "The test confirms a 99.9% probability of paternity. Mr. Sterling, this is your biological daughter." The room went silent. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Michael's face crumpled. He covered his mouth with his hand, and tears started streaming down his face. He looked at Sarah and whispered, "You're my daughter. You're really my daughter." And then he did something Sarah had never experienced in her entire life. He stood up, crossed the room, and hugged her. Not a polite hug, not a casual hug, a real one. The kind that said, "I've been waiting for you my whole life." Sarah broke down. 23 years of loneliness, of wondering why no one wanted her, of feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, all came pouring out in that moment. She had a father. She had someone. She wasn't alone anymore. But as they sat there together, holding on to each other like they were afraid to let go, one question remained. If Sarah was Michael's daughter, if she had survived that fire, then what happened to Catherine? Where was she? Why had Sarah been abandoned at a hospital? And who knew the truth? Michael pulled back and looked at Sarah with a determination she hadn't seen before. "We're going to find out what happened that night. I'm going to hire the best investigator in the state, someone who specializes in cold cases. Because if you survived, there's a chance your mother did too. And if she's out there somewhere, we're going to find her." 2 days after the DNA results, he had already hired someone. Her name was Rebecca Torres, a former detective who now worked private cases that the system had given up on. She had a reputation for finding answers when everyone else said there were none. Michael and Sarah met her at a coffee shop downtown. Rebecca was in her 50s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude. She listened to everything, took notes, and then said something that made Sarah's stomach drop. If your wife survived that fire and gave birth, someone helped her disappear. Fires like that get investigated thoroughly. If there were any signs of survival, they would have found them. Unless someone made sure they didn't. Rebecca started digging into the fire reports. She requested copies of the original investigation, interviewed retired firefighters who had been on the scene, and tracked down hospital records from Nevada. It took her 2 weeks, but she found something. A discrepancy in the timeline. The official report said the fire department received the emergency call at 2:47 in the morning, but Rebecca found an earlier call, one that had been deleted from the official records. It came in at 2:15, 32 minutes earlier. Someone had called for help before the fire was even on record. Rebecca managed to get a copy of that original recording. When she played it for Michael and Sarah, the room went cold. It was a woman's voice. Panicked. Coughing. Barely able to speak. "Please help. There's a fire. I can't get out. The baby." The line went dead. Michael's face went white. "That's Catherine. That's her voice." Rebecca nodded slowly. Someone deleted this call from the official record. Someone made sure it wouldn't be part of the investigation. She pulled out another file. Hospital records from Nevada. A Jane Doe was admitted to a hospital in Las Vegas 2 days after the fire. She had severe burns, smoke inhalation, and she was in labor. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl and then disappeared 3 days later. No identification, no insurance, no follow-up. Sarah felt like the ground was falling out from under her. That was me. That was my mother. Rebecca looked at her with something close to sympathy. The baby was found abandoned at a different hospital 6 hours later. Someone dropped her off with a note. "The hospitals are 40 miles apart. Someone moved you." Rebecca spent the next 3 weeks following every lead she could find. She tracked down nurses who had worked at the Las Vegas hospital 23 years ago. Most didn't remember much. It had been too long. But one nurse, an older woman named Gloria, remembered the Jane Doe. She was terrified, Gloria said. Not just from the fire. She kept saying someone was looking for her, that she wasn't safe. We tried to get her to stay, to let us help her, but she disappeared in the middle of the night. Took nothing with her, just vanished. When Rebecca asked if anyone had visited the woman, Gloria hesitated. There was a man, well-dressed. He came asking questions about her the day after she gave birth, said he was family, but something felt wrong about him. He didn't seem concerned. He seemed like he was making sure of something. Rebecca brought this information back to Michael and Sarah. Someone was tracking Catherine. Someone knew she survived and was looking for her. And I think that same person is the reason Sarah ended up abandoned at a different hospital. Michael's jaw tightened. Who would do that? Who would want Catherine gone? Rebecca pulled out another file. "I looked into your life back then, your business, your finances, your family, and I found something interesting. Your mother, Helen Sterling, took out a life insurance policy on Catherine 6 months before the fire. $2 million. Michael's face went pale. "My mother? No, that's not possible. She loved Catherine." Rebecca's expression was grim. "The policy was never claimed because no body was found, but your mother was also the one who identified the house as a total loss. She was the one who told investigators that Catherine couldn't have survived." Sarah watched as Michael struggled to process this. He stood up, paced the room, ran his hands through his hair. "My mother wouldn't do that. She wouldn't hurt Catherine. She wouldn't take my child away from me." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Rebecca continued. "I did more digging. 3 weeks after the fire, your mother made a significant cash withdrawal, $50,000, no record of what it was used for. And around that same time, the hospital in Las Vegas received an anonymous donation, same amount. The pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture that made Sarah feel sick. Michael's mother had been involved. She had known Catherine survived. She had known about Sarah, and she had made sure they would never be found." Michael sat down heavily. "Why? Why would she do that?" Rebecca's voice was quiet. "I spoke to some people who knew your mother back then. They said she never approved of Catherine, thought she wasn't good enough for you, thought she was holding you back from your potential. When the fire happened, maybe she saw an opportunity, a way to remove Catherine from your life permanently." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. This woman, this grandmother she'd never met, had stolen her entire childhood, had separated her from her parents, had let her grow up alone and unwanted. "Where is she now?" Sarah asked. "Where is Helen Sterling?" Michael looked at her with hollow eyes. "She died 4 years ago. Cancer." The room fell silent. The person responsible for all of this was gone. There would be no confrontation, no answers from her directly, no justice. But Rebecca wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. I found a record of Helen visiting a psychiatric facility in Oregon multiple times over the years. She listed the visits as charity work, but I looked into that facility. They specialize in long-term care for patients with severe trauma and memory loss." Michael's head snapped up. You think Catherine is there? Rebecca met his eyes. I think it's worth finding out. They drove through the night. Michael, Sarah, and Rebecca made the 8-hour trip to Oregon in silence. What do you say when you're about to meet someone who might be the missing piece of your entire life? When they arrived at the facility, a doctor met them in the lobby. Michael explained everything. The fire, the DNA test, the possibility that his wife might be a patient here. The doctor's face remained professional, but Sarah saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. We have a patient who matches that description, the doctor said carefully. She's been here for 19 years, severe memory trauma. She remembers very little about her life before she came to us. But there's one thing she's never forgotten. A name. She says it almost every day. Michael. She says she needs to find Michael. Michael's legs nearly gave out. Sarah grabbed his arm to steady him. The doctor led them down a long hallway to a room at the end. I need to prepare you, she said. Catherine, if this is her, has been through tremendous trauma. Her memory is fragmented. She may not recognize you immediately. Please be patient with her. The doctor opened the door. Inside, sitting by a window, was a woman with grey-streaked hair. She was thin, her face lined with years of confusion and pain. But when she turned around, Sarah saw it. The same green eyes. The same face from the photograph, just older, more tired. This was her mother. Michael took a step forward. His voice cracked when he spoke. Catherine? The woman stared at him. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to remember something just out of reach. Then, slowly, tears began to fall. Michael, is it really you? I've been trying to find you. I tried so hard, but I couldn't remember where to look. Michael crossed the room and dropped to his knees in front of her. I'm here. I'm here now. I never stopped looking for you. They held each other and cried. 23 years of separation, of loss, of broken memories, all pouring out in that moment. Then Catherine saw Sarah standing in the doorway. Who is that? She whispered. Michael turned, tears streaming down his face. Catherine, this is Sarah. She's our daughter. Our baby survived. She's alive. Catherine's hand went to her mouth. She stared at Sarah like she was seeing a miracle. My baby? They told me she was gone. They told me I'd never see her again. Sarah walked forward slowly, her own tears falling freely now. I'm here, Mom. I'm real. Catherine reached out with trembling hands and touched Sarah's face. Then she saw the birthmark on Sarah's wrist. The crescent moon, she whispered. Just like mine, just like I always knew you'd have. She pulled Sarah into her arms and held her like she'd been waiting 23 years to do it. And maybe she had. 3 people, torn apart by lies and cruelty, were finally together. Finally, home. 6 months passed. Catherine's memory slowly returned. Not everything, but enough. She remembered Helen coming to the hospital after the fire. Remembered being told that Michael didn't want her anymore, that the baby had died, that she needed to disappear. In her traumatized state, Catherine had believed it. Helen had arranged for her to be placed in the facility, paid for everything, and made sure she'd never leave. It was calculated. It was cruel. And it had worked for 23 years. Michael sold the mansion. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of loneliness. He bought a smaller home where the 3 of them could start over. Sarah enrolled in college. Catherine started painting again, something she'd loved before the fire. They had family dinners, celebrated birthdays they'd missed, built the life that had been stolen from them. Some nights, Sarah would wake up and have to remind herself it was real, that she had parents, that she belonged somewhere, that she was wanted. Helen Sterling never faced justice, but her legacy died with her. The truth came out, and the family she tried to destroy was stronger than ever. Think about this. How many times do we let other people decide our worth? How many times do we believe the lie that we're not enough? Sarah spent 23 years thinking no one wanted her. But the truth was, someone had been looking for her all along. Sometimes the family you're meant to have is just waiting to be found. Sometimes love survives everything, even decades of lies. And sometimes asking one simple question can change your entire life. Sarah asked, "Why is my mum's photo here?" And that question brought a family home.